Why do tragedies happen in the world? Why do bad things happen to good people or innocent people? Why does God allow that? Boy. Maybe I can tell a story real quick. I was with my wife, and we were on our honeymoon, and we were sitting down for a meal, and there was a guy across from us, and he heard us talking, and he caught our accents and realized that we were from America. So he asked, who are you? What are you doing here? Oh, you're on your honeymoon. And he asked what we do for a living. And my wife was a teacher, and I told her I was working on becoming a cleric. Well, this guy, I remember him to this day. His name was Eddie. Eddie was not a believer. And Eddie was a little upset with God or this idea that we live in a fallen world. And he was upset specifically with the fact that young people were starving in foreign countries. Why would God allow this? I forget exactly how I answered the question. But it went something like this. Well, we live in a world where God gives us a free will, and oftentimes, sadly enough, we use our free will in very inappropriate ways. We bring our own passions and our own ego to the table, and not only do we bring them to the table in our personal lives, but then we bring our own passions and our own ego to the lives of our local government, our local organizations, and the state level and the national level, and then to the global level, where our pride, our ego, our prejudice, our biases create a situation where tragedies develop or where tragedies cannot be addressed appropriately or to your satisfaction. And there's certainly truth to that. Part of me, I think, wanted to say to Eddie was, well, Eddie, honestly, what are you doing to address the tragedies of this world? It's not enough to just rail against God and say, oh, well, God doesn't exist because he doesn't deal with all of these tragedies, and these tragedies are terrible, but then at the end of the day, you just go home and don't do anything about it yourself. So it's, we don't want to fall into this hypocrisy where we want God to come down and solve all of our problems while we just sit on our hands all day. That's not helpful. And I don't think that's a true way of living. It's certainly not the way of Christ. Another way that we can answer this question is looking at what Christ did. Yes, Christ came and he healed many people. He healed the sick. He gave sight to the blind. He healed the paralyzed. He straightened the back of the woman who was bent over. He cured the kinswoman of Peter of her fever. He brought Lazarus out of the tomb. He did those things. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, what Christ did was to accept voluntarily the cross, to die, to descend into Hades, to rise again on the third day, to ascend into heaven, to sit at the right hand, and to come again. Christ was about and is about dealing with sin and its ultimate consequence, death. So Christ came to deal with our sin and to deal with death, so that sin and death ultimately do not have the final word. They don't have the final say. So when someone says, why doesn't God deal with all of the tragedies in the world? We can say with some sincerity that he has done something. He voluntarily accepted the cross so that the death that you see in the world wouldn't have the last word. So that the tragedy of a young innocent child dying of a disease or of hunger wouldn't be the ultimate conclusion of the world, but that the resurrection from the dead would be his response. So Christ has done something about it. Christ has addressed it. Now, why he doesn't come down from heaven every single day and address all of the issues? Well, part of me wants to say, I don't understand the mind of God, and we ought to be very careful of accusing him, and to understand that he knows what he's doing, and that he has given us his Holy Spirit. He has brought us into his church. He's given us his very body and blood, and he's called us to go out and to address these things ourselves. We also have to remember that God is not a micromanager. God isn't going to come down from heaven and solve all of our little problems. He's not about that. God is working on a cosmic level, and his cosmic work does have an impact on our small little problems and even on our great problems, but it might not be the impact that you might think or that you might expect or that we might demand in our own pride and our own arrogance and our own ego. So I would also say to the question of why do bad things happen to good people? Well, first of all, I think most people in the world unfortunately think that they are the good guys, and they look at everybody else and say, "Oh, well, they're the bad guys. Why are they prospering?" Of course, the bad guys think that they're good guys, and of course also when we say why do bad things happen to good people, there's an implied judgment that we are good. And that the people who don't experience tragedies are somehow exempt from tragedy. So we're judging them and thinking, well, they don't have any problems, when in reality they probably do. So we need to be very careful not to judge the tip of the iceberg that we see in other people when we have no idea of the tragedy and the difficulties that they're dealing with below the surface. Another thing that we can say is, I say it like this: the devil's plans are thwarted by the devil's plans. Here's what I mean by this. When difficulties and even tragedies, even unspeakable and seemingly unbearable tragedies happen in our world, the fathers talk about this. Sometimes they don't even talk about it. They rejoice in it. That something bad came their way, because they used tragedy, they used trials, they used tribulations as a way to humble themselves and as a way to draw closer to God. So if we could have that mindset, if we could have that heart when something bad happens to us, that we can turn this negative situation into a prayer, into hope, and we can turn toward God in the midst of it, then that tragedy, that tribulation, that trial isn't something that's negative after all, is it? It's something now that's being used for our salvation. So that's why I say the devil's plans are thwarted by the devil's plans. He gives us something negative, but if we turn to God in the midst of it, then his plan comes to naught. And instead, the opposite happens. We draw nearer to God, and we experience him in a salvific way. So that's what I wish I had said to Eddie.